Fred Miller. We're here today with our first Ask the Governor program for state employees within the Roberts administration. My job here is to get her assignments as she listens to things from the audience, and maybe there are some things that I could help contribute to, but most of the program is a matter of the audience asking questions directly to the governor and her responding, and we're hopeful that many agencies then will show this program to employees so that there's a chance to get a message out, and we're thinking that you have some very important questions to ask that all other state employees will be interested in. So with that introduction, we'll turn it over to the governor, and I think any of you can ask questions, and hopefully there will be lots of them.
Well, I told Fred that it was interesting that I go on and do a lot of radio talk shows and a lot of television interview shows and a lot of newspaper interview shows, and all of a sudden I got very nervous because I was coming over here today to talk to state employees. And then I realized that, you know, that thing we have to constantly remind all of ourselves of and remind the public of is that our state employees are citizens, and their concerns are the same as citizens every place else in the state. I don't think they're changed a bit by the fact that you're state employees, except you're more knowledgeable about your state government. So once I figured that out, I relaxed and decided this would be fun, and I'm just going to enjoy it. So I'd be happy to take your questions on any subject except my age.
Governor Roberts, I'm
Hi,
Jared
Jared.
Weller. I'm with the Department of Insurance and Finance, the Oregon Occupational Safety and Health Division, Oregon OSHA. I'm curious, this is a new role for me working for OSHA. It's an enforcement role. I'm working for an enforcement agency, and suddenly I have to see myself differently, sometimes in enforcing rules and regulations and penalizing people that I really kind of like. But I know that that's my role and it's something I have to do. I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about your philosophy on consultation and enforcement programs, specifically maybe around Oregon OSHA. But in general, I think many people in state agencies are part of enforcement. And how do you feel about that?
Well, Jerry, that's a really good question, and let me tell you, I really have a strong philosophy in the particular agency that you speak about, but I think it translates into a lot of other agencies in state government. And that is that the first role of government is to educate the public that we serve. And if we can find a way to educate the public to really avoid the breaching of the rules in the first place, then we have less enforcement to do. And I think sometimes government has tended to come, not just state government, but government in general, has tended to come through the philosophy of doing the enforcement without looking at the educational component first. And I think about the workers' comp arena as one of those areas. If you look at the safety, we did a better job, particularly of helping small employees who don't have safety engineers on their staffs, of teaching small business owners how to help their employees avoid accidents on the job. We'd have less of the situation where we're enforcing rules that say you have violated the framework of safety. So I think in many respects, part of our job is to do the education that helps us to avoid being in a predicament that we're always doing the enforcement and never doing the positive piece of government. That doesn't mean there aren't those who will intentionally violate rules, or will push to the edge of those rules, or who will occasionally break those rules without knowledge that they have. I think the hardest part of what we do is that we don't always get to be someone that's loved. And I think when you're the person who enforces rules, no matter what they are, you don't always get to be liked in your job. And people who work hard, and state employees do, would like to be respected for the professional job they do, and that's a very hard thing to do in the arena of enforcement.
My name is Randall Garay, and I work for the Employment Division. I'm not quite as sharp as him. I had to write my question out and read it to you here so I wouldn't forget what it was.
I'll promise to give you not quite such a sharp answer.
Okay. I appreciate that. It's twofold. It deals with the Federal Unemployment Tax Act funding issue and the state-federal partnership to meet the workforce of the 90s. Recently, former Secretary of Labor Elizabeth Dole announced an intention to introduce what we feel was unnecessary legislation to reform the nation's employment service. I'd like to know a little about what your agenda is to restore a positive state-federal partnership and your thoughts on removing our dedicated funds now being held hostage on the federal unified budget.
I know why he wrote that down. Well, let me take a stab at it, and maybe Fred can add something to this, because this is an area that I'm less knowledgeable on than I'd like to be, but one that I have very strong feelings. I think that there has been a tendency on the part of the federal government to believe that we at the state government level don't know how to operate the programs that deal with employment. We have, I believe, a very strong new philosophy in the department that's going to be very, very positive in terms of how we outreach to the public and serve the unemployed and serve the employer at the same time. The trust funds that sit back in Washington, D.C. that were intended and paid with the intention that they serve those populations have not always been available to us to do the service that we'd like to be able to do at the state level. One of the places we're obviously now touching on how those funds should be used, in my estimation, is what we're doing with the new workforce development role that we're looking at as part of my administration and the broader view of how we prepare that workforce for the year 2000. And when we began looking at taking out of the trust fund dollars for placement in the Welfare Reform Act, I think we were using those dollars and we're considering using them for exactly what they were intended to do, which is to place workers in the workforce. Now, there are those who believe that those funds should somehow be held for some magical thing that I don't know what it is in the future, rather than using them for the thing we need them most for now. And the Welfare Reform Act is intended to begin with the training and the reversal of the pattern of unemployment and the pattern of poverty. And when you've done all the training and you have the welfare mother prepared to go to the workforce, placement is the next step. And that's an appropriate way to use employment dollars. And I think now the federal government understands that's an appropriate thing we're doing. I think they're pleased to see the creativity that Oregon is using in moving in that direction. And what we need now, I think, is for others to understand, the business community, for instance, that this is the most positive thing we can do with the taxes they've paid. It's our way of saying, not only will we place workers in the workforce that you need, but we will also remove people from the welfare rolls that you're paying taxes for. It's a win-win situation. I think the federal government doesn't quite understand yet that the real creativity in government is occurring at the state levels now. That's where the creativity is, that's where the cooperation is, that's where the collaboration is, and we're going to show that it can work. And I think the more we do that, the more the federal government is going to view the role that they play in this arena differently. And I think that we're moving in that direction, and we have to convince the federal government that we really do have the best intentions for the unemployed worker, for the employer, but the other piece is for the use of tax dollars. I think we use it effectively at the state level, and I think we can prove that, and we will prove it more and more every day. Fred may have some comment on the technical piece of...
You're doing fine. I think we have a major problem with federal trust funds where there's an attempt to look as though they're balancing the budget on the federal level and keeping back, whether it's highway funds or aeronautics funds or others. That's really a paper exercise, but hurts us with the state, and I think we have to keep hammering on that, as I know you were in D.C. last week doing that.
And one of the things I did when I was in Washington, D.C. last week, I met with every member of our congressional delegation, the 5 congressmen and the 2 senators, and we talked about trust funds, the highway funds that were available. Every state in this nation needs highway funds to move forward with renovation and new highways. The aeronautics thing that Fred mentioned, we have a trust fund, just like we have for the highway and like we have for employment, in aeronautics field. In this state and lots of other states, but in Oregon, because I understand it, we have small municipal and private airports and public airports all over the state that are in desperate need of funds. And we can't get funds out of the trust fund for aeronautics because it helps make the federal budget look better if they leave it in the account. So here we have, with safety factors being raised on airports, small airports all over this state, and we can't get our hands on the funds because they're in that trust fund, and they don't want anybody to use them. I mean, I can't imagine our looking at a trust fund that belonged to Oregon specifically, and we'd say to people, I'm sorry, you can't have the funds that you put in here for this purpose. And maybe that's because the state government operates with a balanced budget and the federal government doesn't have to. That may be the difference. And that's good for us, I think.
Governor Roberts, my name is Sly Zelnis with the Department of Environmental Quality. With a good deal of attention being paid lately to state agency organization efficiency, with some focus on looking at middle management levels and where there may be some trimming that might be appropriate. Can you share with us what your personal opinion is, having been around state government prior to your current position? If there is a lot of room for looking for efficiencies, or are we really fairly efficient as it is and could stand being looked at, but perhaps not with the kind of critical eye that some of the public would like to see?
I think there's no question that there's none of us who do what we do and couldn't do it more effectively or efficiently. I think that's the reality of human nature and an overworked work staff, which most of us are. But the issue of efficiency, as we look at mid-management as an example, There was no question there were places where when we had to make choices about cuts, some of them occurred at the mid-management level because we obviously had to have a top management to run an agency, and we needed the online workers to deliver the service. And if there was a place that we could flatten an agency in terms of cuts, that was a place that was more realistic. Doesn't mean it wasn't nice to have that level of mid-management, but if we could make it smaller, we could cut and still deliver the same amount of service, hopefully, that we would have done otherwise. I think the public's view often is that we're not very efficient and that we spend more than we need to and that we have more employees than we need to do the job. That usually reflects there never having been in a state agency to watch how it works. And I have no question that during the 1980s, when we went through the lengthy recession we did in Oregon, that we cut whatever fat was really there out of the state budgets. We really moved to efficiency because we didn't have a choice. And we really got rid of a lot of that I don't want to use the term waste because I don't think that's what it really was, but we examined how we used those tax dollars and learned to use them more effectively with less waste in that process. Now we're in a situation where after 7 or 8 years of operating in the recession, we now have, in terms of Oregon's economy, the ability to come in and do the job that we've left undone in some cases, the buildings that need renovated and the services that haven't been delivered and the kind of thing we haven't been able to do as well as we'd like to. And now we have Measure 5, which is really a self-inflicted recession. And we find ourselves being examined again for how we do what we do and how much it costs us to do it. I think state government is very efficient. I would lay it up against the federal government without a moment's hesitation, any place in federal government. I would lay it up against some local governments in terms of our efficiency here. I think we do it, and I think we do it well. The problem is we have to learn to do it even better. And that's the reality of what we're faced with now with Measure 5, with the cuts, and with our need to build credibility with the public. And we need to feel that every day we're willing to examine ourselves and to look at our credibility as it's viewed from the outside. It puts us under a microscope, which isn't always fun, but it does make us examine how we use what we use in terms of tax dollars in a more effective way. That's the reason I supported the performance auditing in state government. And it wasn't always because an agency meant to be inefficient or meant to use dollars inappropriately, but because sometimes we'd not done a good job of examining better ways we might do it. So I think we're in a mode of saying, how can we examine better ways to do what we do and be creative, like we were talking about with the employment issue, be creative about how we use those tax dollars. I'm very proud of state government, and I talk to people in state governments in other states, and believe me, I think Oregon is at the top of the line in terms of the way we use tax dollars and the way we use the employees in state government and the expectation of the load that state employees carry. And I think if people on the outside of government understood it better, they'd be sending us money instead of taking it away.
I should add one thing to that, though, because we are going to have to start in July, as the governor appreciates, with the next round of budgeting for 1993-95. And that really means another 20% cut. And the question is not whether people are hardworking and dedicated, but how to do things in a way that really accommodates a fairly substantial cut. I was with people from the private sector yesterday, from NERCO, US West, Tektronix, who've said we had to do the same output with half the employees. We've been through that, and we have trouble believing that the public will be comfortable with a tax overhaul unless they think government has gone through that. So the question isn't, I think, dedication or hard work. It's a matter of we've got to think of new ways to get there, and we've got to think of how to measure our output in ways that are understandable.
And I think the other thing I would say to you, that part of the conversation I'm going to be having with Oregonians over the next year is what do they want their state to be like? I mean, what is it they want to buy with their tax dollars? Do they want good schools, and do they want good colleges, and do they want a clean environment, and do they want good corrections facilities, and do they want alcohol and drug programs? I mean, what is it they want in a state that they live in? What do they want the environment they live in to be like? And part of that is the question not only of how we deliver and how much we pay to deliver, but what is it they want? And I think the difficulty we have is I think they want more than in some cases they're willing to pay for. And I think what we've got to do is to have the conversation about what do you want, how do you want to pay for it, and then we'll work to give them the most efficiency we can with what they give us to pay for it. And I think that's part of the conversation we've not done very well with Oregonians.
Hi, Governor Roberts, fellow state employees. My name is Fern Sophia. I run the print shop at the Liquor Commission in Milwaukee. Is this a one question per customer today? Or
I don't know, depends on the first question, Fern.
Okay, well, I'll start out with this one. In 1988, the voters passed a ballot measure which revoked an executive order by then-Governor Neil Goldschmidt, which forbade discrimination against state employees on the basis of sexual orientation. The measure also mandated, and this is the way I understand it, and as I remember, it wasn't a very understandable issue, the way that it was worded, but what I understood was that it also mandated that supervisors of state employees might go ahead and discriminate against state employees on the basis of sexual orientation, and then the supervisor would not be disciplined for that, or some such wording. The measure doesn't specify a particular sexual orientation, as I recall, but the proponents of the measure during their campaign made it abundantly and pointedly clear that they were targeting homosexuals in state government. Then Governor Goldschmidt followed up the election with a strong statement banning discrimination based on any factor in state government. Coincidentally, there were some events that happened. In general society, there was a great increase in the number of hate groups, gangs that started coming into the state. There was a documented increase in hate crimes based on race, sexual orientation, and other factors. As well as in the state system, within the state system itself, there's been an increase in incidents of things, everything from harassment to outright, so-called AIDS jokes and so forth. For homosexual people in state government, this is particularly threatening because there are few legal protections for homosexual people in employment in general. For every state worker, this kind of a policy adds a kind of an element of menace and I think of sleaze to the atmosphere that we work in. And I wonder today, Governor, if you would comment on that situation and talk about your actions that you propose to take in this particular area. Thank you.
Good question. I think Fern has raised a question that clearly speaks to not just what we do in state government, but the culture in which we operate on the outside of state government and where those two come together in terms of the issues of any kind of discrimination. And one of the things I am absolutely committed to is diversity in the employment of state government employees, managers, boards, and commissions. Now, you use the term diversity, and what does that mean? Well, it means racial diversity, it means age diversity, it means sexual orientation, it means gays and lesbians, it means every piece of what it is that makes us one different from the other. And really, state employees are representative of the general population, and we should be in terms of the diversity within state government. That means we have no reason that I know of to discriminate against anyone based on any one of those varieties of diversity that's possible within the employment force, the boards and commissions, the appointments I make. Those ought to be representative of what our state is as a whole. What we found in the outside culture, if you will, with those measures were the raising of fears about things that had nothing to do with the capability to work and deliver service. Nothing to do with that. And it is very easy in an atmosphere where you begin to have hate groups that are being anti-Jewish and anti-black and anti-Hispanic and anti-gay and anti-lesbian and anti-anything else you want to be anti, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, whatever it is they're anti. And when that kind of hatred begins in a culture, and those who lead sit silently by, then it grows. And I don't intend to be silent. I've never been silent on these issues, and I don't intend to be silent as governor. The only way I know that you stop hate is to say that it's inappropriate. And many of the things that are done in Oregon and in other states, sometimes in state government, intentionally or unintentionally, verge on creating an atmosphere where that hatred can grow and that suspicion can grow. So my intention is, and one of the difficulties when you try to deal with diversity in appointments is sometimes you're aware of that diversity, but you don't announce it. It's very easy. If I point a black to a commission or board, you can tell that. If I appoint a gay or a lesbian, you may not be able to tell that. I may know it, they may know it, but you may not know it. But in our looking at the diversity that we want to see in state government, we literally have looked across that whole breadth. And I tell people that diversity includes age. Every employee is not going to be... Every employee cannot be 39. And I think we forget that within the agencies that we work, sometimes employees who've been there for a long time begin to get shuffled back, and you listen to the new young college graduates, and you forget to listen to the person who has 25 years experience in that agency and has been through it all. The same is true of people in terms of weight. I mean, there's just a lot of discrimination that occurs for things we don't even think about. And so my commitment is that diversity is part of Oregon's workforce in general, and that it be part of state employment workforce in particular. And if we set the example of the state government for removing hatred and suspicion and ugliness and ugly jokes and ugly posters and inappropriate things we do sometimes without thinking, if we can set that example in state government, I think we can make that happen in the state as a whole, so that we don't have anybody in Oregon who walks down the street in fear of their safety because they're different. And that's my hope, that we can make a real statement about that in the 4 years I'm in this office.
Governor Roberts, I'm Lim Reeb with the Office of Medical Assistance Programs. I'd like to know if you're supportive of a single-payer health care system such as Senate Bill 790, which has been introduced in the legislature. And if so, how you would see that fitting with the prioritized health care system that's under development right now for the Oregon Basic Health Services Program, which is due to be implemented in July of 1992.
Well, let me comment first, because I have more knowledge of it, on the latter question, and that is the Senate Bill 27 piece, and our attempt to try to deliver the maximum amount of service we can within the dollar framework of the intentions of Senate Bill 27. We are obviously being looked at nationally as a state moving in a very creative way to attempt to deliver the most service we can deliver to people with the most need. And it is, I think, one of the most difficult things we've ever attempted to do when you make a list of priorities about how you deliver medical care to the poor, and you say which ones do we deliver and which ones do we not deliver, and where do you draw the line. It's clearly a very difficult thing, because you literally make life and death choices about deliverance of medical service. I think Oregon, though, is going to show that if this is done correctly, we're going to make very wise medical choices, and we're actually going to serve people better than we've served them before. We're working very hard to try to get the waiver out of the federal government that will allow us to deal with the Medicaid issue in this way. I think it will be a national model when it's completed, and I think we'll show we can do more for the poor, and the fear that some have that we're trying to do less by going through this route, I think will be set aside after a period of time. The single payer issue, I'm not sure that I am knowledgeable enough to answer your question on the bill. It's not one I'm familiar with. I know there are people in the agency who are, but I have not been dealing directly with it, and I would be happy to get back to you on it.
Governor Roberts, I'm Chris England with the Public Utility Commission. I was wondering if you've given some thought to other funded agencies. For example, the PUC is funded by fees collected from the industries that we regulate. And with ballot measure 5, the monies will still be there unless the fee structures or the fee schedules are restructured.
Well, that's one of the questions we have the hardest time explaining to the public. We talk in general fund dollars about the budget cuts from ballot measure 5 because they're general fund, but as you well know, we've got a lot of state agencies that are funded by other kinds of dollars, either other kinds of tax dollars or dedicated funds or fees. And what happened with a group called Oregon Tax Research is they took all of our general fund programs and all of those other funded programs, and they stirred them into a pot. And then they said out there in the public, to the television and the radio and the talk shows and all of the people they could get to, state government really didn't get cut. It's got more employees than it had last time, and look at all this money. Well, what they did was take the highway funds and other dedicated funds and put them into that quotient, and then deliver what looked like a huge increase in what we were spending and how many employees existed in Oregon. The truth is we basically deal with the general fund when we talk about ballot measure 5 and when we talk about the cuts. Now, it's possible, if you wanted to make a point, I suppose, to go into an agency funded by fees, and ask it to take the same 10% cut that everybody else took. But why? I mean, would we stop building highways with federal funds to prove that everybody carried the same part of the load out of the general fund process? I don't think so. I think we use what we've got, as much of it as we can use, to deliver the most services we can to Oregonians. I will tell you, if we get into the second biennium of this problem, and we're looking at $1.7 billion of cuts, we may be looking at some very creative relocation of dollars in state government. It's a nice way to put it. We're going to steal money from those special funds. But no. But the thing is, I think it's really important that we understand that if you have a fee-supported agency, we might say to that fee-supported agency, a portion of these fees that went just to this purpose before may now be expended to cover some other broader purpose in order to meet needs we can't meet with any other kind of tax dollars. So I think there is a difference between what we're doing now and what we may do if we get into a second biennium without really getting the revenue correction that we need to do this. And this time it seemed fair and responsible to do it as we're doing it, but that doesn't mean if we found ourselves down the road with no correction of this problem that we wouldn't have to reevaluate that. I think
This summer, as we're looking at the 20% cut scenario, and appreciate we won't have a resolution of that for at least another year, one of the things we will look at is statutorily dedicated funds. There are lots of fees and funds out there that, with a change in law, could be used for general purpose. And that doesn't make the particular constituents happy, but it may be something that we need to do. Those funds that are constitutionally dedicated, that's a different question. That requires a public vote.
that's right.
Governor Roberts, I'm Tom Burrow from the Department of Veterans Affairs. To kind of take a different angle to these same budget problems, we've talked about the efficiency, but it seems to me the electorate, their reluctance to pass a sales tax is kind of a lack of trust in us. And it seems to me part of what we have to do is sell the public on what a good job we are doing. We have to convince them that we're giving them the bang for their buck. Do you have any ideas that you're going to pursue to do this?
Well, let me take a minute. Can I give you a little bit broader answer of that question? Because I think this is one worth taking a minute or two of, I might. If you've paid attention, and I know you do other things besides read the newspaper about what the governor is doing, but if you paid attention to what I did a couple of weeks ago when I basically announced we weren't going to come for any new taxes in this legislative session in order to meet the cuts we'd made in state government. Part of the reason I did that was exactly the question you're raising, and that's a credibility question. I put a lot of fees in the budget. We'll get part of them through. I put money in there for the assessment on hospitals to try to get money in to do some of the medical things we needed to do. There's some money in there that I've committed to parks and to light rail. But for the most part, I don't have a lot of new taxes in the budget. The more I dealt with the public and the more I talked to them all over the state of Oregon, the more I understood 3 or 4 things. One, there was a credibility problem. 2, they weren't sure whether we were making cuts or whether we weren't, we and the local governments. They didn't know whether to believe us or not to believe us. They wanted property tax relief with Measure 5, and they're not sure yet if they're going to get it. They don't know really what's real and what's not right now, and there's a great deal of confusion out there in the public. They're unsure, and we have a credibility problem. The legislature, the governor, you, all of us. So I made a decision that the most important thing we could come out of this legislature with, besides a balanced budget that we make go as far as we can, was credibility. One of the ways I think you get credibility is to say to the public, you passed Measure 5, we heard, we got more efficient, we cut our budgets, we bit the bullet, we did what you asked us to. Here's the budget that results from doing that this biennium. Now, the second piece is, if that gains us some credibility because we did, in a sense, what we were asked to do, then where do we go from there? And my plan that I announced a couple of weeks ago is that from the end of the legislature, for a number of months after that, my job, and as many people as I can list in that job, will be to say to Oregonians, I have some things that I want to see Oregon be and remain. But what I want to know is, what do you want Oregon to be? It's that question I raised a few minutes ago. What kind of service do you want? What do you want your state to be like? What do you want to buy? What do you want to live like? And to see if we can get Oregonians to tell us on the broadest basis we've ever asked, in as many forums as we can find, to tell us what they want Oregon to be like. And then when we finish that, to be able to literally hold up the list and say, this is what Oregonians have told me they want for Oregon and Oregon's future. Now I want to ask Oregonians how they'd like to pay for it. and we have a conversation about how we pay for it, what kind of taxes, who pays them, how they pay them, how much they pay, so that we can put on the ballot in 1992, or hopefully about May of 92, a tax measure, whether it's a sales tax, whether it's not. My preference is a sales tax. But to put a measure on the ballot that gives Oregonians an opportunity to buy the vision they've told us they wanted for Oregon. We've never tried to do anything this way. We've always found a measure, said this is our measure, that's the date we're putting it on the ballot, and here it is. Slight campaign, raise a little money, give them a few ads, and see how it works out. It's not good enough. It's just not good enough. What I'm attempting to do is to find out how we build credibility, how we find out what they want, how they find out what they're willing to do, and then when they go to the ballot, they're not just voting on a tax. They're voting on a vision about what Oregon can be. That's what we need them to do, or we're never going to get there. What can you do? The credibility piece is not just mine. It's all of ours. It's every employee of state government, how they behave on the phone, how they drive in a state car, how they use the supplies they're given in the office. I mean, if you got a new administrator in your agency, I described this morning, and you got 12 boxes of letterhead and the administrator's gone away and you can't use the letterhead, don't throw 12 boxes in the garbage and let somebody find them to hold up in front of a TV camera and say, look at this fancy letterhead, throw it in the garbage. But rather, cut off the letterhead and use it for notepaper. I mean, there are little things that just irritate the dickens out of the public when they think we're not being efficient. How we treat the public as customers rather than annoyances sometimes, because we're tired and you're under pressure and you do a lot of work that makes you worn out and you get tired of the complaints. You get tired of people who don't understand what you do. But our patience level and our ability to treat with respect the public we deal with and to use efficiently what we have, our time, our supplies, our travel, all of the things that we get evaluated on, and we can do that well, I think we can change the credibility of state government. We may want to ask local government to help us with that job. I wish we could ask the federal government to help us with that credibility. I mean, I think that's part of what we pay for. We pay for other people's credibility gaps as well. So maybe we have to do our job better than the people who are not going to do it as well in some other agencies at other levels of government. But I think every employee in state government can make a difference in making this happen.
The other thing we've emphasized in terms of what every employee can do is to become knowledgeable on what is really a very complicated area of public finance. And we're trying to get information out to agency administrators and to communications people that hopefully will funnel down in organizations so that when your family and neighbors ask you, was there really a cut in state government, or are programs really being reduced, or what is the situation, you have a good answer. Because if you don't, I think it just creates a situation where people don't quite believe us. And that's another one of our burdens. I assume that if the vote was something like 52% for ballot measure 5, state government is representative, and we may have had 50% voting. And that's fine if that's based on all the information, but I just don't think all the information is out there. And you have access to it, I think, through your agencies, and I'd obviously like to see you work at that.
We have a poll that shows that, what percentage of the people voted for ballot measure 5 to get property tax relief?
Something like 53, 54.
Yeah, it was a very high percentage of the people who voted for ballot measure 5 voted because they wanted property tax relief. Well, it's pretty hard to argue with wanting property tax relief. Only 17% of them voted for ballot measure 5 when they were polled because they wanted to cut state government or wanted to make government more efficient or more accountable. Well, 17% is a pretty good percentage. But that's not the major reason. They wanted property tax relief, and what that says is, basically, we have a tax structure problem. And we need to overhaul Oregon's tax structure so people don't feel that pressure on the property tax that caused them to do what they did with ballot measure 5. And I don't think they understood the long-term damage the measure was going to do. I don't think they had any comprehension that every year for 5 years it was going to get worse. And they were going to get property tax relief, but they were going to devastate everything they cared about out there in the public service arena. Colleges and schools and parks and prisons and everything they wanted done. So I think Fred really hit on a very important point. People expect you who work for state government to understand this stuff. And you got another life. You don't just do what we do, who are politicians, and Fred, who's whatever he is here, and bureaucrat. No. But I mean, you have other things to do with your life. But if you would take the time to take the materials that are coming out from the executive branch right now to help you understand this better, so you could describe it to others better, we could multiply our efforts for the public's knowledge on this issue and maybe make it easier to have a conversation with them about it. So that would be really appreciated if you could do that.
Governor, I'm Sherry Bell from State Corrections. I have a question with a slightly different twist. In a recent speech to a growth symposium, you were quoted as saying that Oregonians do not want our state to be paved over and become another Seattle or Los Angeles. And I'm from the LA area, so I can relate to that. And you said that the LCDC has the power to act. And so my question to you would be, do you feel it is possible to prevent the urban sprawl as the inevitable influx from other states increases?
Yes, I do, Sherry. I think one of the things that's sort of, as Oregonians or even transplanted Oregonians in some people's cases, that I think we love most about Oregon is that we have a little elbow room and we have beautiful mountains and streams and things. You can go fishing 15 minutes away, you can go to the beach an hour away. There's just all these things we can do in Oregon because we've got a little elbow room. Well, in the next 9 years, by the end of this decade, there's supposed to be between 300,000 and 500,000 new people moving to Oregon. That's a remarkable number of people in a state that has less than 3 million population. That is going to push on everything that we have in place that we love about Oregon. It's going to push on housing and on keeping our environment clean, on a place to go to a state park, a place to fish that you don't have to fish with 20 people at your elbow. It's going to change everything we do. And if we don't plan for that growth, then we end up being like Los Angeles. If we don't plan, you watch a city as wonderful as Seattle was a decade ago, and I don't know how many of you know Seattle, but we always talk about Los Angeles. The truth is, the same thing is happening to the Seattle area. What we want to do is plan our growth in Oregon so that we can locate people in residential areas who are residents, so that farmland can be for farming, so that forest land can grow trees so we can have jobs off of it, so industrial land is for doing industrial work. And if we keep those pieces in place and don't just allow things to spread as they have in California and the state of Washington, we can still have a great deal of that quality that we care about. Means there's going to be times that there's going to be terrible pressures to say, I really want to have my 3-acre ranchette on the edge of town. Well, that's great. But everybody who gets the ranchette on the edge of town, developed by somebody who comes in from some other state who thinks that's how you do things, the more the farmland's gone. And the more we put pressure on the forest land, and the more you bring housing developments and condominiums right up against a farmer's land, so that if he wants to plow at 5:30 in the morning, everybody's mad. And if you don't plan, then everybody's hurt, the agricultural community, the residential community, and the quality that we're trying to build in Oregon. So it's a very hard thing under the pressure we have, but this is what we put land use in place for. It wasn't for 10 years ago or 17 or 18 years ago when we put it in place. It was so it would be ready when this growth came, and it's coming. So I'm hoping we can let this growth happen in Oregon, because we can't stop it, and still do it with a certain kind of preparation and planning that allows Oregon to be a quality place for our kids and grandkids to grow up in. And I think that's really what it's about. It's not so much us, I think, anymore, but them and what we leave for them. The problem is we're going to do it so well, I think, in the end, that more people from other states who've done it poorly are going to come. And I don't know how to stop that. That's the hard part.
I'm Fred Tollison with the Employment Division. I'm the president of the Employees Local. Throughout state government, Mr. Miller and others, some of us within the union have been fostering the relationship by RBO and the Labor Management Committee organization throughout state government between the union and management. And I wonder if you could speak to that and give us your feelings on how the state is getting along with its employees and how you see the future of that.
I don't think I can speak to it with the knowledge that Fred can, but let me make some generalized comments for you or to you. I believe very strongly, and maybe it's from other backgrounds that I come from. Let me give you an example. I was a school board member for 10 years, and school board members negotiate directly with teachers across the table. That's how it's done. We used to have what we called a love-in at the beginning of every negotiation session. We'd go and we'd all get together and we'd have hors d'oeuvres and wine, and we'd basically get together and socialize for an evening. Remind each other that we're all in the same boat, that we're all headed the same direction, that we all have the same goals in terms of wanting to deliver service and be good at what we do, and that we have a mutual amount of respect for each other in our roles. We try to really work hard at reminding each other that at the beginning of a process, so that when you got in the middle of a negotiation process, you might remember that you liked each other when you started. I think that's an important thing to remember. But also that you respected each other when you started. And if you did it right, you wanted to get on the other end with that same amount of respect. I think that's one way to do it. And it worked, at least in the school district where I served, for a very long time and worked very effectively. But the truth is that's a one-shot way to do it. I think the better way to do it is to have relationships that allow the executive branch and the governor and state employees groups to be able to work together on an ongoing basis, so that there's not this sense that somehow you've got this governor up there and you've got Fred Miller over there and you've got somebody else over here, and then there's the rest of people who work for state government, and we sort of dictate from on high down to those of you who are in the trenches. I don't think that's a very effective way to do government. I don't think it's a very effective way to do relationships. And I found that the better the communication is, and the oftener it occurs, and the more places you give it a chance to occur, the better the relationships become, and the easier the negotiation process and the disagreement times are. And there will be disagreements. There'll always be disagreements. But it doesn't mean that they have to be disrespectful. And I have hoped, as we've gone through this current labor negotiations, and I think maybe the reason it's coming as close as it is to fruition right now is because we tried to carry into that process that respect. And I hope we can continue to do that.
My name is George Robeson, and I'm with the Oregon Water Resources Department. I'm one of these people that has two questions I'm hoping I can get into.
I'll tell you what I did for, and depends on what the first one is, whether you get a second one.
Okay, my first question is kind of general, and it regards the resource agencies. I see it in my agency, and I see it in other ones. We have lobbying groups that are always pressuring our agency to do certain things and also pressuring the legislators to pressure us to do certain things. And they tell us, okay, well, we want you to do this and this and this, and that's in one committee, like the policy committee. Then we go over to the revenue committee, and they don't give us any resources to do it. And 2 years goes by, and then we look very bad because we did not do what we were supposed to do, but we weren't given any resources to do it. And I was wondering, my first question is, how as a executive are you going to deal with this kind of a thing, where eventually we're going to get sued and other agencies are going to get sued, and they have been sued on issues like this? How would you like?
Let me give you a couple of examples of that working and not working that I think I can recall. I did it when I was Secretary of State. I served as the state auditor of the state of Oregon. It was during the time that we did audits on a huge amount of agencies, including the first performance audits that were done in state government. In the process of doing that, I think I had 4 press conferences in 6 years about an audit. My job, I thought, as an auditor, was to bring problem areas to an agency and help them correct them. The only time I ever did press conferences on audits was when we had an audit, 3 or 4 audits in a row, where the same problem occurred over and over and over, and where there was a requirement that an agency had to do, and they didn't ask for the money to do it. Not that they didn't get the money, but they didn't even ask for the funding to do it. Now, this is obviously pre-Measure 5, and we've got a little bit of difficulty here with it now under this current situation. But what we tried to say was, if an agency has a legal obligation given to it by the legislature or given by the courts, wherever it comes from, but a legal obligation, that they have an obligation to bring that legal requirement for funding to the legislature. You can't guarantee the legislature gives it to you, but if you don't even ask, then it's clear that you're not committed to the legal obligation. And sometimes agencies get things they don't want to do. But you can't say, well, I don't like this, and the legislature did it to me, and somebody lobbied, and I got stuck, but I'm going to solve the problem. I won't do it. I just won't ask for the funding. Well, that's not a legal way to handle the obligation of an agency. So I think the first thing is always to remember, and I don't know how we quite translate that under Measure 5, but we at least need to tell the Ways and Means Committee from an agency, we have 3 obligations that are in the law, or 7 or 15. We cannot ask for that money in this budget under the 10% cuts, and you need to know that we are not going to be able to do these legal things that we're required to do. And you need to put that on paper, and you need to make it clear to a Ways and Means Committee, so that when they've made their decision, it should include the budget notes that speak to that issue. So I think you have an obligation to tell, but I think you also have an obligation not to take something out of a budget because you don't want to do it. there's no question about the pressure that you get from outside, from legislators and from constituency groups who want you to do something their way. And sometimes that's not going to be your way. Sometimes you'll get stuck with it. Sometimes you'll get reformed by it. But the truth is, I think the legal obligation comes to meet the letter of the law and to be clear with the legislature about what your financial needs are to do it. If they don't give you the funds to do it, clearly then there's some legal protection for the fact that you've not done it.
I would just add one thing, that problem is certainly not peculiar to natural resource agencies.
No.
If you think about caseloads in children's services or adult and family services, or think about corrections or higher education, the same kind of argument can be made, and I think that's just a function of being stretched, and it gets back to pushing us to think of more effective ways to do things, which isn't always easy.
The agency that we were dealing with, that we did one of the press conferences, was the health division. It had to do with testing water for water safety. It had to do with swimming pool inspections. It had to do with a number of things, some of which have been delegated to the local level, and then they didn't check to see if the local level did them. So they had, and in some cases they hadn't asked for the funding to do them at all. So it really is across all kinds of agency lines, I think.
Okay. My second question is a real specific one. Is there any way that we could revisit the way we procure things, especially computer parts? Currently, we're kind of locked into a price agreement that is quite a bit higher than the market rate right now, and this has been going on for the last couple of years, and it just seems like that might be something we could save a little bit of money on.
Fred, I'm going to give this one to Fred. It's too hard.
I mean, the answer is yes, there's a way to do that. Sometimes when I hear that and then check back through, it's a peculiar situation that arises because of some process we've actually done correctly. In some cases, I think there are things to improve, and that's the kind of discussion we do have with our information systems people. I'd be happy to follow that up with a conversation. If you gave me some specifics, I'd look at it.
And let me comment on one thing. Sometimes you know something that we don't know, and we want to know. I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that needs to be brought up and say, you know, look at this, maybe there's a way we can do it better. And that's a good reason for employee suggestion programs to point out the kind of places we can do things better. And sometimes there are things that behind the scenes in the everyday work world, you know, and they never get to my desk and they never get to Fred's desk. And then there's no way to see if we can look at it and examine a better way to do it. So it's really important that you let us know and that you go through your agency when there's suggestions that can bring that kind of examination of a better way to do it. Thank you.
As a person, first of all, I'm with the State Revenue Department Property Tax Division.
A popular person on
Yeah,
that.
right now, very popular, yes. As a person who's worked with Oregon's property tax system for 25 years, I think I've had a pretty good opportunity to both grasp the concepts of the system and the general awareness or understanding that the public has of that. And I guess I would tell you something that probably comes as no great surprise, but I don't think nearly as many people understand it as would feel that they did. With the acknowledgement that we have a fairly complex property tax system in place, we've added a new dimension that's going to make it immensely more complex. In fact, the people that work with the system, the budgeting, the education service districts, et cetera, are terribly confused about Measure 5. And I don't think there's any question that 5 was passed to literally hold the gun at our heads and say, we're tired of this, do something about it. What concerns me is how we're going to proceed from where we are now in terms of overcoming what this is no doubt going to do to us. And I think part of that image problem is that we've kind of locked ourselves into a system where we have income taxes and property taxes and not a lot of other taxes. And we've been able to sort of withstand that to a point, and then finally the dam is broken loose. But what we're faced with now is breaking out of the old rut. I mean, we keep hearing, well, you've already voted down the sales tax 8 times. That seems to be in itself enough to keep people away from the sales tax. Well, if it wasn't good 8 times before, what's going to make it good now? So how do you overcome that? How do you explain to people that if you go across the border into the state of Washington and you add their property tax, you add their B&O tax, you add their license fees and everything else together, that those people are getting banged much harder than we are, and that we've really got it made here when you start looking around at others. And yet we don't seem to be able to get that story out in an adequate sense to change people's perceptions of this. So rather than just sitting back and sort of letting all these things happen, Where do you see the state going in terms of getting over that hurdle and breaking that roadblock?
Somebody like to answer that question? No, he really has laid out a very accurate scenario of where we are in Oregon. And I tell people that, you know, along with the birth certificate, anybody work where we do birth certificates in that department, along with the birth certificate that Oregonians get, there's always this little line at the bottom that I describe to people. It says, I am permanently opposed to the sales tax. It comes on the birth certificate. And I think that's the first problem we have, is this perception that somehow Oregonians are never willing to change. And the fact that they voted against something a number of times is a perception on some people's part that they would never do it, that they would never change. People don't remember that we got rid of the inheritance tax and the inventory tax. I'm trying to think of it. In the last 10 years, I think we've had about 12 taxes that we've gotten rid of. And if you look at Oregon and Washington, they always talk about how awful our tax structure is and how great Washington's is. You put them side by side and look at what people pay and their car licenses and their license plates and all the taxes they have that we don't have. They're paying a much different amount of tax than we are, but it's not less, it's more. And we don't even understand that we're dropping Oregon. And Fred has a chart, and we'll need to get that around to show you how we compare before Measure 5 and after Measure 5 with Washington, with the U.S. average, with Mississippi, with a number of states, so you can see. And what we've moved is Oregonians into paying much less taxes, which means we can't meet our service needs. I'm absolutely convinced that because Oregonians have done something in the past, that they don't necessarily get hooked to it in the future, if we know how to present it. I mean, if that was the case, I wouldn't be governor. They've never elected a woman, so they won't. You know? I mean, that doesn't make sense. You give people a framework to make a decision with all the information, and you help them get to that decision making, you can get them to change. They've never been in a circumstance like they are right now. With the growth coming, with the Measure 5 in place, I mean, we don't want to do scare tactics because I don't think people believe them yet. But if we get into the next biennium with $1.7 billion of cuts in our budget, we're going to be closing colleges, we're going to be closing state parks, we're going to be closing down prisons, we're going to be doing things that no one in Oregon believes we'll ever have to do. So I don't want to do it on a scare tactic basis, but the time will come when Oregonians will need to know what they've done. Then what I keep saying to people, it's not the kind of tax, it's not the name of the tax, it's the design of the tax. Fairness and equity and taxation are based on the design, not the title. So if we can get people to understand that a sales tax, for instance, can be designed fairly, and if you take food and housing and medical care and utilities off, the things you have to live, if you've got a low-income tax credit with it, if the rate is in the Constitution, and if you put all those protections on it, the exact people who are expected to get hurt with a sales tax, which are low income and seniors, are the exact people who benefit from a sales tax. And people haven't understood that yet because we've always talked about a sales tax being regressive. If you go to Washington, they tell you an income tax is regressive. It depends on what you're used to. So part of it is communication, part of it is education, and part of it is being at a place and time in Oregon where Oregonians are going to have to be at a crossroads and make a decision. They have never been in a situation where they had to make the kind of decision they're going to make over the next 2 to 3 years. And I think that's going to change the perception. The problem is everybody wants it to be simple. They want it to be simple. They want to have 3 lines on the ballot and no more would be required because it would be so clear. Well, the truth is, simple taxation is like simple brain surgery. You probably don't want it because it's the complexity of taxation that builds in the fairness. And it has to be complex. And they've killed measures on the ballot by saying, if you don't understand it, vote against it. It's a wonderful tool because most people don't understand it. He's spent 25 years learning the property tax system, and that's about what it takes. So we've got to find a way to have Oregonians feel some trust, some credibility in the leaders in this state so we can talk to them and they don't believe we're lying to them. And if we do that in the educational component correctly in terms of bringing those issues out in a non-bureaucratic way, in real English, not revenue replacement, tax overhaul. Think about the difference in how that sounds. Revenue replacement sounds like something that came out of an agency of government. Tax overhaul sounds like something the mechanic did. And there's a difference in how people perceive it. So we've got to learn to put the language in a way that people understand it, and it's clear, and it's honest, and we don't try to find a title for something else. A sales tax is a sales tax is a sales tax. I refuse to call it something else so that we can fool the people. And I think the more we can be direct and honest and clear, the better chance we have of changing the tax structure. I believe it can be done no matter how many times it hasn't been done before. I was born in Oregon in the year the income tax came in, so I figure I can be governor when the sales tax comes in.
As state employees, and we've talked about this with agency head meetings, this is probably the most exciting time that we'll ever have to spend in government, this last year and the next year, because we're not observers of what's going to happen to us as much as players in maybe making the major change in public finance and major change in school finance that ever been made in the state, and with a governor who believes and I think will make that change. I think this is really an ideal time to be here.
Paul Kleiner, and I'm with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And one of the things I've noticed since I've been here is that our agency in particular depends on the network of other state agencies and federal agencies cooperating and coordinating together in order to be effective. And I've seen that because of the mandates a lot of those agencies have, they go about doing things that we all want them to do, but they do them separately. And it does cause a lot of problems for us in particular, and I think a less efficient way of getting the things that we want done to happen. And I'd like to know what your plans are for enhancing the coordination among state agencies, perhaps getting the federal agencies to coordinate with us a little bit better, especially on issues like water quality, wetlands, where we're getting new federal mandates to do things, and the money's not always there, but the requirements are.
Okay, let me make some comments on that. I tell people when I was a single mom, whenever we were going to have a crisis or we were going to make a change, I always called my two sons in and set them down at the table, and we talked about we're going to move because the rent went up or whatever it was, but we never surprised each other, and I wanted my kids to be participants in helping me make those decisions, or at least being participants in understanding those decisions. And it really was a very good learning experience as a human being about what you can do if you bring people together to do them. Rather than letting them sort of find out by accident what you've done to them. And I think that applies to government the same kind of way. And we really have a number of examples right now of places we're trying to do exactly that. The housing arena is one. We have a housing shortage in Oregon, and nobody really started talking about it until the last year and a half. When I brought it up in the campaign, everybody looked at me like I was crazy. Why is she talking about housing? Who cares about housing? We got more response to talking about housing than anything I talked about in the campaign, except Trojan. But one of the things we've done now is to look at all the places we touch housing in state government. And we're bringing all those pieces together. And we're going to be able to deal with housing with federal programs, state programs, local programs, low-income programs, tax programs, any places that touches housing, so that when we use our dollars, we use them effectively, we know what each of those housing pieces are doing to each other. Well, the broader way to look at that is the thing that we're calling in my administration livable communities. If you're going to talk about livable communities in Oregon, you talk about LCDC, you talk about transportation, you talk about housing, you talk about education, you talk about the environment, you talk about all the pieces that make a community livable. And then you bring those agencies together to say, if we're going to build a light rail line in Washington County, we ought to be thinking ahead of time, not at the last minute, about LCDC. We might want to think about land use planning as we look at transportation planning. And if we're going to do that, where's the housing going to be? So there's been a tendency for each of those agencies of state government to do their thing appropriately, but without understanding what the people in the next agency were doing that impacted exactly the same city, or the same county, or the same town, or the same agency. And we have not done that very well. So what we're doing with workforce development is exactly the same thing. We're looking at all the agencies in state government that train or prepare or educate workers. It's a massive, I wish I'd have brought the chart, it's a massive number of agencies. And we've never talked about how we bring them together in any kind of a coordinated fashion to end up with a trained and prepared workforce. The natural resources agencies raised that question. It's exactly the same thing. So I think this is probably the administration that's more committed to coordination than anybody you've ever seen come into this government. I believe we do it better, we do it more effectively, more efficiently, and at less cost if we do it that way. But it's not easy. It is not easy to coordinate 15 agencies who touch a community. And it takes a lot of cooperation, and you start stepping on turf. That's the hard part. And we've got to pull back and say, you know, this is not turf. This is the community of Beaverton, or this is the community of Canby. The agency is not the turf, that's the turf, and we've got to make that work. And we've got to be able as a state agency to come in and help them when they're doing things in those communities with all of the agencies that touch that community. I think we can do that.
This time is very valuable, as you can appreciate, for the governor, but I think this is one of the best possible uses of the time, because not only are you citizens but state employees. We can do this kind of program more often, and I think we'd like your feedback, both from you here and those of you who watch it on tape, because we could establish something, for example, if you brought in spouses and kids in a different auditorium, if we had more employees or did this in a different way. But I think it's, we need to hear from you. And obviously you can't do this every week, but if we wanted to do this every month or two and there were sufficient interest, we could talk about that.
And we would do it oftener for chocolate chip cookies.
As we would. With chocolate, it's very
Do not
clear.
send boxes of chocolate chip cookies, because I will eat them all, and so will Fred. So.
Well, thank you all, and
Thank you very much.
let us know what you think of it.